Good evening, guys. This is our first episode of the interview series by Planet No.2. Tonight, we are very excited to have Dr. Peter Kelly with us online. Dr. Kelly has a PhD fellow from University of California, Berkeley, and was a full-time economic professor at Renmin University in Beijing, China. He is the founder and CEO of Grow Further, an NGO promoting sustainable agriculture to facilitate food security in developing areas. He's also the vice president of the Carbon Washington and an active environmentalist. Welcome, Dr. Kelly.
Nice to be here.
So our first question for you tonight is that for your project Grow Further. I mentioned that the transition of technology and development of consensus are both important factors when talking about a revolutionary food secure economy and future. To be specific, which factor, Dr. Kelly, do you think is more important? Is that education, technology, or both of them combined?
Well, they're important. They're both important, and they complement each other. In the United States, we have a system of teaching, research, and extension / commercialization. So teaching of agricultural scientists and also of farmers, research on agricultural technologies, and then agricultural extension, where farmers learn about those technologies, and also the extension agents learn quite a bit from the farmers as well, and hopefully convey some of that to the scientists, and commercialization.
Mm-hmm. So I read in your personal story that you mentioned the bureaucracy is the main obstacle or impediment that prohibit the international agriculture science exchange. Can you give us and our listeners some example of this in the light of those sort of obstacles? Through like what kind of process will Grow Further accomplish its mission despite these setbacks from the government?
Well, it's not government in particular that's the problem. I mean, actually, many governments around the world do fund agricultural research, and as do private companies. But they both have limitations. So government has difficulty funding projects that are high risk because you basically can't tell whether if the government does something that's high risk and it doesn't work, the taxpayers and voters, citizens, can't very easily tell whether it was an honest failure or whether it was corruption.
Absolutely.
And then the private sector has a different kind of limitation, which is that if intellectual property can't be protected, patents more or less, but in the case of plants, it's a little more complicated than just patents, that it's not very attractive to the private sector. So there is a role for the nonprofit sector, which has a huge role in medical research and other kinds of science. But other than a few major foundations like Gates, Rockefeller, Ford, Hewlett, McKnight, a few major foundations, the nonprofit sector is not very much engaged in agricultural research. So there's no way for individuals to get involved the way that without becoming a full-time professional and, you could say a bureaucrat, in the sector, the way that you can volunteer for a medical research study, donate to medical research, help find distant galaxies, et cetera, et cetera. And we think that's a problem. And on the other end, agricultural scientists with innovative ideas, they only have a few places to look. They can apply to the government and a couple of major foundations, but if it doesn't happen to fit within their agenda, then it doesn't happen. So if a farmer or a scientist has a smaller or more innovative idea that doesn't necessarily fit within the agenda of one of a small number of institutions, then it might not happen. And climate, we have a changing climate. We need all hands on deck to ensure a food secure future.
Absolutely. I think the opportunity the government or other organization can provide for, as you said, the farmers and all those environmentalists who are activate and want to participate in such a debate should definitely have a chance to do that. Um, for the second question I want to ask you today is that I notified that you study in agricultural and resource economics for your doctoral degree, and
Uh-huh.
um, as a former economics professor, in your what is your opinion on how economic play a role in the goal of achieving revolutionary food secure future?
Well, I mean, economics is key to farming. Farmers base many or most of their decisions on economic factors. The context, of course, varies a lot from one place to another. Some places there aren't markets for land or labor that we would recognize in the West. But nonetheless, markets are important and important in coordinating economic activities and ensuring a food secure future. And there's definitely a role for markets in that. But there are some things, as I was saying before, that markets don't do very well. So there are some concepts like crop rotation, for instance, where there's nothing to patent, and just relying on markets to do research on things like that isn't likely to work very well.
Yeah. As I also read in an article, it states that for every energy transition, like for example, from the pre-industrial revolution to a post-industrial revolution, there will always be a economic transition accompanied with as well. Do you think that for a green energy transition that we are facing today, there must be an economic boom that got combusted by the market?
You mean, will the transition to a clean economy be driven by market forces?
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at? Oh,
Hmm.
yeah. The markets are going to play a significant role in building a green economy. The cost of renewable energy, energy storage, energy efficiency, all of those kinds of things has gone down tremendously, such that these technologies, electric cars, and so on and so forth, are really competitive with the dirty technologies in the private markets. Unfortunately, carbon dioxide continues to build up in the atmosphere, and we need to build a clean economy sooner rather than later. So accelerating what is already starting to happen in the private sector is an important goal of public policy, and one that Carbon Washington is pushing forward. We've always throughout our history of Carbon Washington, we've been pushing for pricing of carbon, whether it be taxes or treatable permits, or payments to farmers who sequester carbon in their soil. And we're also interested in building financial markets to green bonds, green banks, things like that, to accelerate this transition to a green economy. Because even if a solar panel or an electric car will save money in the long term, there's an upfront capital investment,
Hmm.
and making an upfront capital investment for something that's going to save money later on requires a debt or other financial market to make it happen. So we are
Absolutely.
so we've made some progress at both the state and the federal level in terms of carbon pricing and other policies. But there's still work to be done around developing those financial markets,
Hmm.
and accelerating the transition to a clean economy.
Absolutely, especially for those developing countries. So,
Yeah, I mean, China has made some significant progress in developing green financial markets. There's obviously still a lot of work to do, but is in many respects ahead of the United States in green finance. But there's a lot of work to do throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. You have
Okay, yeah, Dr. Kelly, my name is Charles and I am a member of David's project. So what I want to ask is that I recently read a book called The Precipice by author Toby Ord,
Uh-huh.
and it's about like the existential risk and the future of the humanity. Some of the point the author made really sticks in my head, such as like the fact that while the human technologies keeps thriving and making solid progress, like people often fail to treat technological advances with their maturity, like even causing natural hazards sometimes. So I want to ask if there are any other books that you would recommend for the young generations to read in order to acquire some degrees of knowledge about agricultural sustainability.
Oh, that's a good question. The In economics, most economists write articles rather than books. So in economics, there are relatively few good books about economics. The in international development, there's a book called What Works in Development. So taking a more empirical approach to look at what kinds of development programs have succeeded. Let's see. Which area were you asking about? Was it environment or international
Oh,
development?
any area, like your area or just like the future overall.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is actually a good question that I should think more about. I actually have several librarians in my family who might have reflected on this more than I have, and I have I've read a number of good books, but I'd actually have to get back to you with some thoughts on what the best ones would be for high school students.
All right, that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because like the concepts sometimes like the author would create some concept by themselves. I think that's really interesting. Sometimes kind of like catchy to use.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just find it interesting to read these stuff about how they really analyze the future.
Yeah,
So
that's a good question. I'll think about that.
okay.
All right. Hey, Dr. Kelly. So I'll jump in here. My name is Victor, and I'm all the way from Budapest, Hungary.
Uh-huh.
It's been a pleasure, first of all, getting to listen to you tonight and to talk to you a little bit. So the name of our organization, as you know, is pretty ironic in our opinion. We call ourselves Planet No.2 because we know that there will not be a second planet for us to survive on.
Uh-huh.
So our mission is to raise public awareness of the impending climate crisis and to try to call upon the public to take action. So as a well-known leader, professor, organizer, could you give us some specific suggestions that might help us achieve this mission?
Okay, well that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
There are a whole variety of approaches. Climate change is a complicated problem, and it's not going to have one solution. There are a variety of ways that someone can contribute to addressing the problem, and it depends a lot on what your skills are. So depending on what your skills and what you have, what you're bringing to the table. So there are emissions reduction strategies. There are climate adaptation strategies. So Carbon Washington, which has engaged high school volunteers in various campaigns in the past, works more on the emissions reduction side, and then Grow Further. And we've also engaged some high school students, have works more on the adaptation side. And so it requires a variety of professions. So whether you're going into economics, in which case you might help finance the clean economy, or engineering, which is also very much needed, or politics, any of those career paths can significantly contribute, or even green collar jobs. There's a huge demand for them as well, that don't necessarily require higher education. So there are lots and lots of different ways to contribute in your career. There are also ways to contribute as a citizen outside of your career. You can get involved in politics, depending on where in the world you are. That may take different forms, but there are various organizations that you can support. There are companies that you can invest in. You can buy stocks. You can buy bonds in companies that are helping to build a clean future. There is a demand for not only grassroots politics kinds of volunteers, but also skilled volunteers. So whatever direction your life may take, you can apply those skills as a consultant or a board member or something like that down the line. So some things, in some respects, it's easier to contribute a little bit later in life. Something that there are more options, but throughout life, there are ways to there are ways to contribute. It really depends a lot on who you are. Different people can contribute in different ways.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of useful information. It really sounds like basically everyone in the entire world can contribute in some way, and that's great. I think a lot of our listeners are gonna realize that they can do something for this cause, even if they feel completely helpless.
Yeah, there are. It's gonna take quite a bit of capital to build the clean economy, but you don't necessarily have to provide that capital. You can work with organizations where $1 worth of work is gonna leverage way more than $1 worth of investment in a clean economy. And there are quite a few different approaches to doing that. There's politics. There's development of financial markets. There's adaptation. There are a variety of different approaches where you can where you can have an outsized impact.
Perfect, thank you. I think I'll hand it back to David now.
So, Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for your time here tonight with us. Us, Victor and Charles, stated that our mission of Planet No.2 is that we're really eager to call upon actions, especially to high schoolers, to act against the climate change. I really hope that in the future, Planet No.2 can have more opportunities to collaborate with Grow Further and Carbon Washington. And maybe we can have more conversations like this to inspire more generations and high schoolers to take actions. Again, thank you so much for coming with us tonight.
Well, yeah, I'd be happy. Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'd be happy to participate in the future.